I want to extend a really, really warm welcome to all of you, all our attendees, our physician community, our women in neuromodulation members, our amazing volunteers, our Nevro team members, and of course, our IT and production team that made it possible. And we've been planning this for over a year, so along with Erin and Melissa and Faye and Michelle and Mike in the Nevro team. And I feel like when I woke up today, I felt that this is International Women's Day, and we are honoring women in health and life sciences. And I just couldn't believe it. It is when you wake up and it's a day like that. And it's International Women's Day. Can we give a round of applause? Yay! So thank you so much to Watermark, first of all, for making it happen. We do a lot with Watermark. We really feel that their mission is amazing. They do a lot of great events all year around and really do a lot to advance the mission, which is to increase the number of women in leadership. And also at Nevro, we feel that diversity and inclusion is one of the key tenets of our culture. And we want to share our best practices. We want to share the environment and the leadership and the ethos that we have inside Nevro to the wider community. And it really comes from the top. You'll hear Rami talk about his point of view on diversity and inclusion. It's very inspiring, and I'm excited every time I listen to it, even though I've heard it a few times. I'm inspired in a different way. And I will not say anything more, but let you just enjoy that conversation. And we really want to make sure that we extend our best practices and just the support and advancement of honoring, inspiring, educating women leaders in the broader health and life sciences community. So today, from our perspective, we've started small, but we want, we have aspirations to make this bigger and bigger and share it with more and more people. So please spread the word and just take the day. This is a day for yourself to invest in your leadership and be inspired, be connected, get those headshots, very important, of course. And again, so happy that you are here. And with that, I'd like to welcome our President and CEO, Rami Elghandour.
Thanks, Divya. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning, particularly celebrating International Women's Day. I'm Rami Elghandour, and as Divya just shared with you, I'd love to share with you my thoughts on diversity and inclusion. And we'll go ahead and jump right in. So for those who aren't familiar, this is Captain Marvel, and I put this talk together before the Captain Marvel movie was announced, so I'd like to make sure that that's clear. Most people, when I showed this the first time, didn't know who Captain Marvel was. So, but I really want to point your focus to the quote at the bottom here: "Fighting supervillains is a cinch, fighting misogyny is a real challenge." And I think that quote really underscores what a lot of women feel, like doing the actual job is the easy part. It's tackling all the obstacles that are outside of that job that are unfortunately exist in our society and across societies across the world that really pose the real challenge. And that's really the essence of what I want to talk about today, is why these challenges, what the scope of the challenges are, some of the reasons these challenges exist, and then talk about some of the solutions potentially that we can all engage in order to overcome them. And I want to start, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I want to share with you some pictures that really highlight the scope of this particular challenge. Take a look. It says a lot. Right? There's not really a lot more that you need to add to understand the scope of the obstacles and the problems that are facing us on this particular topic than to see these pictures. So when I think about the challenges that kind of result in the disparity that you saw through that variety of pictures, and they really are broadly representative from around the world, I think of really three challenges: the gatekeeper sort of effect, the unconscious bias, and the presence of pseudoscience that really kind of winds up having a pretty detrimental impact, as you'll see. And I'd love to talk to you about each of these and some of the background and studies and science behind them before we transition to talking about some of the potential solutions. And we'll start with the gatekeeper effect. If you're not familiar with the picture that you're seeing here, this is Britt Marling. She's an actress, a writer, and a director. And she has this great article that you can find and read in The Atlantic from a while back, where she talks about her first experience with Harvey Weinstein. And like many young women, she was early on in her career. She got invited to have this big break to meet with this obviously very influential person in Hollywood. She went to a hotel that she thought she was going to meet him. A young assistant came downstairs and said, you know, Mr. Weinstein's very busy. You actually have to go up to his room. He doesn't have time to come downstairs. And she found herself, like you've heard a lot of other women have experienced, she found herself in a very difficult and very compromising position. What she talks about very specifically is her ability to get up and leave in that situation, which is very different than, again, you've seen from a number of other women. What she specifically cites is it's not that she felt like she had more courage or more ability to get up and leave that situation. It's because she was, in addition to being an actress, a writer, and a director, that she felt like she had the ability to leave. Right? Because for a lot of the other women who went through this situation, they felt like this individual truly controlled their economic destiny for the rest of their lives, right? They could not work. They couldn't get acting work if they didn't comply with these kind of heinous and uncomfortable demands, and so they felt trapped. And the thing that separated her is the ability in her mind, right, to control her own destiny, to create her own work, to create her own livelihood, that really allowed her to walk out of that particular situation. And so what that tells us is we have to be really mindful of this sort of the gatekeepers in this world. And until we get broader gender equity and leadership and sort of change some of this dialogue, this continued sort of problem is going to exist, and it's one of the things we really have to address. Next, I want to talk about unconscious bias. You're going to see here, this is a study of a venture capital group and how this venture capital group effectively used language and communication to communicate bias, right? This is an assessment of how they evaluated male and female entrepreneurs differently, even when they had very similar experiences and backgrounds, right? So some of the things that really stand out here is experience. If you were male and experienced, you were experienced and knowledgeable. If you were female and experienced, you were experienced and worried, right? That's not really a position of strength when you're raising money. You don't want to come across as being worried, even though you have the exact same sort of experience. If you'd already raised money, which would be an asset, usually, I have a little bit of a background in venture capital prior to coming here. If someone had already been successful in raising money, that's usually a good sign. If you were successful in raising money and you were male, you were very competent and already had money to play with. If you were female, somehow that came across as good looking and careless with money. It's incredible, right? So that unconscious bias, just evaluating someone, they have the exact same background, same skill set, but because of their gender, the language you use to describe that person can be really powerful. And unfortunately, that plays a pretty significant role in the income gap, right, and the gender gap in compensation. So what you see is that even though 33% of people in venture-backed companies have equity, they only control 9% of the economic value of those companies. Right? So basically in Silicon Valley and the kind of one of the greatest places in the world to create opportunity, create wealth, women might hold a third of the positions in these companies, but only 9% of the equity in these companies, meaning that men hold 91%. That's a pretty stark difference. When you get into it, it's not just the economics and it's not just sort of the description, but it even starts in the hiring process, how we get these opportunities. So what you're looking at here are the statistics around the probability of a woman getting a job if she's the best person for that job. And this is the same, very similar for minorities as well. If you are the sole candidate for a position, whether that's 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 10, your chances of getting the job are pretty much zero if you're the sole woman out of that candidate pool. If you make it so that there are 2 women in that candidate pool out of 4 or 10 or whatnot, your chances increase to 50-50, and if there's 3 or more, the chances are obviously appreciably better. And the reason for that is that our brains tend to process difference as risk. So if you're interviewing 4 or 5 people, and one of them is a woman, and she's the best candidate out of that pool, what people will go back and talk about isn't that she's actually worse than the other people. What they will say is that, you know, she's the best, but she might be the riskiest candidate here for X, Y, Z reasons. What happens is when you change that profile and you have more than one woman in the group, it sort of eliminates that risk in your brain because you feel like, okay, she doesn't so much stand out on her gender. You can sort of neutralize that underlying risk and focus on the actual merits of the person, right? So this kind of gets you to one of the things that we can all easily do in our companies and everything that we're engaged in is make sure that there's diversity in the candidate pool when we're thinking about whether it's hiring or selecting people for a particular team or a project. That will create further opportunity because it sort of deals with that unconscious and inherent bias that tends to be in all of us. This sort of bias also extends a little bit further, right? If you think about it, generally speaking, people want to preserve the status quo, and as a result, you get these funny sort of statistics, like there are more CEOs of US large companies that are named David than there are CEOs of women. And unfortunately, David isn't even the most popular name. I'm not going to tell you how many CEOs there are named Rami. There's only one other one that I am aware of. But you can see the statistics here, which are also incredibly stark. The odds of hiring a woman were almost 80 times greater if there was more than one woman as part of the finalist pool, and almost 200 times greater if in the case of a minority in a similar situation. Now, I know especially here in Silicon Valley, people, it's a little bit dated now, but you've heard about the Google memo, right? There was this memo, for those who haven't heard, written by an engineer at Google about effectively how women shouldn't be in leadership roles and shouldn't be in technical roles because of the underlying difference in biology. And that gets us into the pseudoscience part of the discussion. Unfortunately, there's a lot of this sort of, especially in this day and age, with access to information that may or may not be accurate on the internet. So when you look at the statistics, which I'll share with you for a second, there's just absolutely no basis for these sorts of statements. And this has been studied in so many different ways, but it's important for us to get educated and understand. There are, as you could see, nearly 4,000 studies have sort of validated this. Outside of, in elite sports, why we have different divisions for men and women in the Olympics, say, outside of that, there are no underlying differences that should determine anything anywhere else in any other sort of setting. That is about it. We can resign ourselves to that. There's elite power sports, we can agree that there is a difference. Outside of elite power sports, there is no difference that should determine anything in terms of one's potential career contributions, etc. Unfortunately, this underlying bias, as you'll see, sort of sometimes transcends even logic and what you believe the impact would be. Take the case of elementary school children. If teachers know the students' names and thus their gender, boys do better on math tests. If the grading is anonymous, the girls actually do better. Now, like I said, this kind of transcends logic because math is math. Like, it is hard to figure out how grading math can result in a different outcome depending on your gender. particularly as an engineer, I'm having a hard time figuring this out. But it kind of, again, it tells you kind of the subtlety of this bias that you wouldn't otherwise recognize, because that is a really hard thing to impact, just purely based on gender. But it also tells you how important it is to be talking about this and to understand it and to think about the impact, the broader impact of these biases. It unfortunately gets worse, if that were possible. So take college-age students. If you, before a math test, remind students of their gender, girls perform 43% worse than boys. But if you tell them that it was a problem-solving test instead of a math test, the gender gap disappears. So why is that important? It tells you that these sort of biases influence everybody. They don't just influence the teachers, they don't influence the CEOs, they influence women themselves at all sorts of different ages. And that's, again, like a really, really important thing for us to understand, because if we don't understand it and we don't understand the impact, we can't possibly deal with it and manage through it. What I want to kind of shift to now is talk a little bit about why this is important. Besides, I think everyone in this room would agree, part of the reason you're here is you believe in fairness and equality and justice, and this just feels like the right thing to do, right? And I think we all feel that way. And that should be enough. But I'm going to share with you some things that tell us that not only is this the right thing to do to focus on these issues and to help address them and resolve them, it is actually beneficial from a corporate perspective and a company perspective and even an individual perspective, in that diversity makes us smarter in a number of different ways. A couple of examples. So there's been studies on this where diversity actually helps us prepare better. So in one study, scientists took a group and randomized them, and they told one group that they were going to prepare to have a political debate with someone of their similar political party, and another group that they were going to prepare to debate with someone of the opposing political party. And can you guess what happened? The people who were going to debate against someone of the opposing political party prepared way better than the group who thought they were just going to talk to someone who's inherently going to have a similar point of view. And that's the advantage of diversity, is we prepare better. If we're in a diverse environment, we're likely to prepare better, right? And I'll take this next example, kind of takes it to an even higher degree. So in another experiment, scientists took a mock jury and they randomized them to having one type of jury that was homogeneous in nature and another jury set that was diverse. And they gave each juror a piece of information, and they let them go out and run through the exercise to see who would do better in terms of evaluating the case and getting to the likely right conclusion. And they found that the diverse juries outperformed the homogeneous juries. The interesting thing is why. So it turns out the homogeneous juries, even though they were giving different pieces of information, because they were with other people that were similar to them, assumed that they all had similar information and didn't really share the information as broadly, and as a result hindered themselves from getting to the right conclusion. Whereas the diverse juries didn't make that assumption, were more openly sharing of the information and experiences that they had, and that helped them arrive at the right conclusion or a better conclusion, right? So one of the things that is interesting about diversity is it helps us anticipate different points of view. We're more open to alternative points of view. We might share something that we might not ordinarily share because we don't assume that the other person already knows that or have had a similar experience. And these results bear out both in terms of corporate America as well as academic or scientific America. You can see that companies with one or more women on their board delivered on average better returns in all sorts of different financial metrics. And in the scientific communities, papers written by diverse groups received more citations and higher impact factors as well. So these are real results that are tied to different behavior that results from having diversity as part of your core mission and part of the representation of your organization. What I want to kind of, as I get to close, talk about next is maybe a little bit of a shift from just diversity to talking about inclusion. When you look at this salt or the spice shaker here, It is clearly diverse, right? We can all agree that it's diverse. But if you turn it over and pour it over, only the salt on the top is going to come out, right? So diversity alone isn't enough unless you have equality and equity in particular, because everyone needs to have an opportunity to be a part of it, right? And I love this quote: diversity is being asked, being invited to the party. Inclusion is actually being asked to dance, to be a part of, a contributing part of the organization or the project. And I think this next picture really highlights the difference, because if you get into engage in this debate with folks who may not have as much background on it, what you realize is you get this argument oftentimes versus equality. Well, equality's fair. Why do we need to do more? Well, we talked about there are a lot of obstacles here that we're trying to overcome. Does this look fair? Does treating everybody the same in this particular picture appear fair or helpful? It doesn't really accomplish much. But if we take a kind of more of an equity approach of giving people what they need, recognizing that things are not, that the playing field is not even, that there are obstacles that we have to overcome, then we get to the right solution, right? So in a world where the playing field is level, of course, the left picture might get you there. If you had 3 women of equal size on the left-hand side, it would be perfectly fine to all give them the same size step up, right? But when you know of the disparities and the challenges that we just talked about, it's clear that we have to take a more thoughtful approach and invest more in doing more in order to equalize the playing field, to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to contribute. I can tell you that consistently throughout history, this is my personal view, well, the first is a statistic. Consistently throughout history, women represent about 51% of the world population, right? If we really want to achieve our full potential, not just as a country or a company, but just as a society across the world, we want to give everybody equal opportunity to contributing to the brightest future that we possibly can. And we can't do that without creating this equity that's important in order for everyone to be able to contribute at their full potential. One of the things that we're most proud of at Nevro is that we do have an environment that is incredibly diverse and inclusive, and you can see that at all levels of our organization. So overall, 49% of our team are women, and in key areas, like a third of my management team, 38% of our team members that are in technical roles like R&D, operations, are women, and nearly 50%, 48% of our managers are women as well. So we're really proud of that, and I can't say enough about how that is a big part of our success, because the way I think about it is we're getting the maximum benefit from 100% of the talent pool, not just 50% of the talent pool, and it's reflected throughout our organization and the historical success that we've had. So to close, I think of really 3 ways that we can continue to have an impact and advance this dialogue. The first is through education. And that's essentially what we did today, right? I can't tell you how many times I've talked about these topics and someone will come up to me and say, wow, I never knew it was that bad. I didn't know the statistics were that bad. I didn't know that the representation was that lacking, right? Or a lot of times for women, it's like, I knew I was going through these challenges, but I didn't really stop to think of how broad these challenges were, how they were impacting other people that I know or around the world. So it starts really with education. The next thing is advocacy, right? Once we have this information, we have to use it to advocate for the right solutions, for people to have that equal opportunity and the chance to contribute at their very best. And the last one is to have the courage really to be inclusive when you're in that position of leadership and influence. Like, I feel incredibly privileged to do what I do here, and I know many of you are in similar situations, and when you're in these positions, you really have to use that position to kind of advance the dialogue, make a positive difference, and communicate those things that are not always particularly easy or require a little bit more effort to communicate beyond just the business results and the business focus. But I can assure you, and hopefully you gain that from the conversation today, that those things aren't just the right things to do. They don't just advance a really a very worthy and a great cause, but they actually will have positive results on your organization and your team as well. So I'll close by sharing a personal story or personal part of my family. So I grew up, I'm a big superhero person. I'm starting and ending with that, as you could see. I'm a particularly a really big Superman fan, down to my Superman wallet, which is a different story entirely. So naturally, as a dad, I'm a father of four children that are all still very little. I want to get my kids into superheroes, right? It's just like we all want to get our kids to like love the things that we loved as kids. And so I tried my best. I got one of my boys I have 2 boys and 2 girls in that order. And I got one of my boys into the superhero thing for a while with Lego Batman, but I just couldn't get my daughter into it. And I searched and searched, and I finally came up with this. This is called DC Superhero Girls. If you haven't ever heard of it, it is awesome. Even for adults, it's awesome. But I might be biased because I do like superheroes. And I couldn't get her to like care or watch the Lego Batman movie. But when I found this, she actually sat down and she watched it over and over again. And when her cousins came over, the next time, they didn't play, princesses. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they actually put some capes on and played superheroes, right? And really the essence of this story is sometimes we forget that until we see somebody like us, it's sometimes hard to imagine that we can be that person too, right? In the case of my daughter, and I've gone through something like this professionally as well, sometimes you don't see people like you at the top or a superhero or whatnot. It's hard for you to imagine that you want to be that. But when you see somebody like you, it can really inspire you to kind of, have that dream and take that step. And that was, a small case study, but definitely a very impactful one in my household. So I think when I think about the scope of this challenge, it really does, it's not a US problem, it's not a Silicon Valley problem, it really is as global of a problem. And if you're gonna think about something that can have a positive impact on the world, like there's not a lot of things that you can think about that can impact 51% of the world population. And I think, thinking about this a little bit differently by realizing that we do need more and more women in leadership roles, and we need to knock down a lot of the barriers and the challenges that we see, the benefit is we're going to inspire a lot more little girls and little boys to really understand the world and have a greater impact that makes it a much, much better place for all of us. So thank you for your attention this morning. I will leave you with some quotes here as I transition to the panel, but hopefully you found the information helpful, and hopefully we can use it all together to continue to advocate for continuing to make a lot of improvements on this topic. Thank you.